Hey everybody, this is Perch. If you've been following Marvel news and Marvel news for a while now, the movie news, you know that Robert Downey Jr. is returning to the MCU and he will be playing Doctor Doom. And we've seen a couple glimpses of Doom in Comic-Con appearances and other places. So we know this is coming. There's a certain amount of excitement about the character coming in. There's an excitement about Robert Downey Jr. coming in. There's a lot of questions around how is it Robert Downey Jr. is alive? He was Iron Man. Is Tony Stark Doom now or not? Is he playing a different character? Does he just closely resemble? Like, how's the movie going to answer these questions? That's something that, by the way, we'll see if the MCU is bright about it or not, but they need to hold on as tightly as possible to that secret. Wait a minute, how is Tony Stark Doom? That needs to be a reveal that does not come out before the movie starts playing. If they throw that into a trailer to be cute or something like that, it's Doom for the movie. I mean, the movie's going to be a spectacle of having all these different characters in it and how they all come together and all the rest. But they don't need that. They don't need that one getting out. It's a bad idea if they do. Anyway, Doom coming into the movies, you have a movement, and I'm using that word loosely in air quotes, of people on the internet who want to basically canonize Doom's origin in a different way. Now, for what it's worth, I'm reading this to you because I think the bigger question is how complex, how real life do you need your villains? That's the question we're answering in this video. I don't think this movement has any traction. I mean, look, I think the people who really were behind the Snyderverse did a pretty aggressive wallets closed campaign for James Gunn's Superman, and it just passed Man of Steel in terms of box office. But wait, adjusted for inflation and including Blue Beetle. Yeah, okay, wait, like whatever. I'm just talking apples to apples. Depending on how you want to cut inflation, we may need to revisit this same achievement in 4 days because that's what it would take roughly. But anyway, my point is internet movements, while fun, do not always translate to the amount of action that the noise makes you believe it will. So I don't think this particular movement is going to go anywhere because it's for a much smaller subset. But let me read to you the new origin story of Doctor Doom and see what you think. So basically, and what's happened is a lot of people have posted the same thing. This has been regurgitated a few times. Victor Von Doom is a complicated man who lost his family because of racism and anti-Zionism. No, anti-Zignanism. He was marginalized when he was an academic, and part of his hatred for Reed comes because he lost his community. And because Reed, a white man, is revered and accepted. This is basically saying, hey, as Ledvernian, Eastern European descent, he wasn't traditional Anglo-Saxon. He was, this vague Ledvernian race that exists only in the comics. And he lost, as quote unquote gypsies, we're not using that word, but as somebody who is, of the Romani kind of, that kind of general part of the world, was ousted from his home, lost his people. And then as a presumably not white person, came to America, was a scholar, but Reed outshone him, not because he was smarter or better, but because Reed was white, and that's why he hates him. And so it says in the top, he's a complicated man. So, yes, he did, he's tried to commit genocide on multiple occasions and murders freely without will. And what is funny is I've seen people recently saying, Latvernia and Doom's rule over it shows, what a true leader would do. It's like Doom's regime was pretty much always defined as fairly fascist. That word gets thrown a lot lately, thrown around a lot lately. But Ledvernia was there. There's many comics with the idea of you can't say ill about him. The people loved him, but you kind of peel back the onion, and they weren't allowed not to love him. There was, it depends on which comics and which panels you read, but you get Latvernia is a, European paradise where everyone reveres their god Master Doom. But then there's, you get other comics where there's a resistance trying to fight against it because Doom has these murder bots roaming around that, annihilate any criticism or critique or disagreement with Doom. So anyway, to me that's fascism, but whatever. I'm sure some political science student can explain to me how that's actually utopian. Whatever. Anyway, so this is the idea that we want to make Doom more complex by introducing in elements where his actions are explained because of racism. And, it's Reed's whiteness that to some extent created the villain that we've got. Taking the race whole baiting argument out of it for a moment, or as much as we can, because that's very kind of Twitter 2018, and still going on today in some places. But the idea that, the real villainy is Reed being white and people looking up to him because of that, versus, Doom skinning his girlfriend alive and wearing her, tanned skin around as a suit, which is also something he's done. That's, we still have a little bit of the elements of, racism as a crime is greater than all other crimes, and look, racism is bad. Genocide. I do. How many of the other? We can list a lot of crimes here. I think like many of you probably heard me say before. I think there's this line where you go past it. It's like it really doesn't matter at this point. You're into evil territory. You've crossed the line into psycho. So what percentage of psycho are you? I don't know. You passed a line where not fit for being around other people level of psycho. I mean, you're there. Congratulations. Anyway, the question I wanted to get to is, while I think some comics have benefited from giving characters a complicated backstory, one of the ones that springs to mind immediately, I'm an X-Men reader, is Magneto. Magneto as a character, fairly early on. It wasn't a much later in life retcon, like 40 years later, we've said to, fill in some blanks. But the idea that Magneto was a survivor of the Holocaust and watched Nazi atrocities, basically murder his family and kind of the horrors around him, and it triggered his mutant ability. And so he now sees himself as a protector for mutant kind, and his vantage point is that, unless mutants stand up for themselves, the Holocaust could be repeated with his people, his other people. Did they ever do much around a shared bond between Kitty and Magneto? I think there would have been, I don't know, you could have had some interesting stories there. I don't feel like we did a little. Yeah, I guess when they were kind of punting around with, does she belong in the X-Men or the New Mutants? This was kind of during the Claremont, this would be, early 200s, about that time frame, right? Or a little bit before there. I guess they did a little, but I don't know. It's probably more that could have been done there. Anyway, I think that works for Magneto. I think that it makes that villain interesting. It creates kind of a deeper examination into his soul. It makes his actions less black and white, and I think it works for him. There's other examples for sure of characters who have a complicated past, and that you could kind of see the torture that led them to this. On the other hand, I don't think every villain needs to be this way. I would even argue most villains don't need to be that way. I think that while it's tempting to give every villain an interesting backstory and here's why they are the way they are, use it as a way to kind of, soften the blow of their evil, or at least justify it to some extent. I don't think I don't think it helps. In the superhero genre, I think it's okay to have a few of those. I think if everyone has those, all it does is it starts to blur the line between heroes and villains into a kind of a giant murky question mark. And, the as much as I love comics, and I do, I don't believe comic books are meant to be, with every single page, a tortured examination of the human condition where, who's to say what is good or what is not? The superhero genre is saying what's good and what's not. It's kind of built into the whole title. And I do believe you can give characters some complicated elements to their past, but if you go too far down that path, I mean, let's say crazy, ensues, and we do get they decide to change Doom's origin to say that, well, the reason why he's villainous is because people, he was ostracized for his community, and then racism. He was victim of racism, and Reed at the center of that was a shining, glowing example of what everybody loved, because he was white. Does that help? Well, one, does that help the movie sell tickets? Two, does that help Doom as a kind of antagonist for the movie? Unless your plan is you're going to do a double turn and Doom becomes a hero somehow. I don't think that helps. Does it help Reed? Do you feel like cheering on Reed, who's supposedly going to be, rumors are he's going to be one of the leaders of the Avengers teams? Does this help that character? Like, he's running around, and it's like, yeah, he's saving the day over here, but he participated in a kind of a racist mob at one point against this Doom guy who looks like Iron Man. Like, I mean, none of that seems helpful to, again, selling tickets, but also the characters. But just think about comics for a minute. Does the Red Skull need a complicated past? They've attempted it before. They kind of walked away from it. At some point, somebody with some common sense is like, yeah, you know what? He's a crazy Nazi. We don't need to, let's not get into if he was abused as a child. Let's just leave it there. Ultron. Does Ultron need a haunted past beyond what he has? Do we need to learn that he only went crazy because, the AI that sprung out of Hank Pym's computers was filled with pornography, and that's why, and Ultron got mad at, I mean, I literally, how many do characters need do villains? This is a core question for you. I say no, but do villains need a complicated, tortured past to explain away their actions? Or is it enough that there's a handful of characters that are just evil, that are just bad characters? How much more is needed there? I just think you get in your own way. You get a couple of them, but how literally does Batroc the Leaper need a story about I don't know, an abusive father? Like what? At some point, is evil just enough? What do you think? Thanks for listening.